Patriarchate television, ერთსულოვნება.
Patriarchal television ერთსულოვნება represents a cycle of programs that contains narratives, memories, and stories regarding to the life and work for public benefit of Catholic Patriarchate of all Georgia, the Archbishop of Mtskheta-Tbilisi and Metropolitan Bishop of Bitrinta and Sum Abkhazia, His Holiness and Beatitude Elias II, from the enthronement to the present day. You will get acquainted to the only one part of these important stories in this program. We will offer the further programs systematically. This building is the present residence of Catholic Patriarch of all of Georgia, Elias II. The building was confiscated from the church by the authorities in the early 20s of the 20th century and returned only in 1919 with great effort of His Holiness and Beatitude Elias II. Prior to that, namely in 1923, the Catholic Patriarch St. Ambrose Chelaya, the confessor, was forcibly moved to the house in the yard of the Sioni Cathedral, located to the southeast. It consists of only 2 rooms. That house no longer exists today. This building was built at the request of Catholicos Patriarch Kallistrates Tsintsadze. On the site allocated by the government of the time, it has become a patriarchal residence since 1952. As you can see, the building has 2 floors. It includes 6 rooms and 2 auxiliary outbuildings. Catholicos Patriarch of Georgia, His Holiness and Beatitude Elias II lived here too, from the enthronement until 1990. The house in Sioni Yard. We decided to call it a program based on what our respondents said and their attitude toward the old residence as a warm house. Let's see how the Sunny night started.
The house in the Sioni temple courtyard. This way, the sunny night began.
Mr. Sergo, what was the layout of this building? Is it the same that it was, for instance, in 1977?
Sergo Vardosanidze, historian, professor. In 1923, when the old Patriarchate residence was seized from the Catholic Patriarch St. Ambrose Chelaya, he was forced to move to the building next to Sioni. All the Catholic Patriarchs, His Holiness Ambrose, Christopher, Kallistrates, lived in that building. Actually, 2 rooms were there. Imagine, the residence of the Catholic Patriarch did not exist. Those 2 rooms were both a residence and workplace for them. His Holiness Kallistrates petitioned the government in 1948 to grant him the right to build a 2-story residence on his place. His Holiness Kallistrates spent the last 2 months of his patriarchate in this residence. The layout is as follows.
Yes.
It is a 2-story building. The office of the Catholic Patriarch was on the right. His Holiness Kallistrates, His Holiness Melchizedek, His Holiness Ephraim and David were working in this office.
Yes, on the first floor.
Yes, workroom was located on the first floor on the right side. To the left was the room of the core bishop. The secretary of the Catholic Patriarch and the accountant all were there. As for the second floor, before it turned into workroom of the Catholic Patriarch, there was a chapel there. It was arranged that way. A chapel was there. And the bedroom of the Catholic Patriarch was on the right side. And a small dining room there. That was the whole residence.
Our patriarch lived so modestly.
Yes, yes.
And other patriarchs too. After the enthronement of Catholic Patriarch Elias II, a fire broke out in the old residence of the Patriarchate, in the courtyard of Sioni.
A fire broke out in the residence of Patriarchate, and unfortunately, a lot of things burned down here then. And it took almost a year to restore this building again. The Patriarch had to work from his own apartment. He had a 2- or 3-room apartment in the sea settlement and worked there, literally. The Patriarchate building no longer existed.
I would like to ask you about the important guest who came to Georgia and visited the Catholic Patriarch and came to this building on the second floor, where, as you told us, the Patriarch had a living room.
The second floor was turned into a living room and workplace of a Patriarch after a restoration. His Holiness and Beatitude received Pope of Alexandria and Patriarch of all Africa Nicholas VI several times in this residence. As Patriarch Diodorus of Jerusalem, Patriarch Ignatius IV of Antioch, then His Holiness and Beatitude received Demetrius Ecumenical, Patriarch of Constantinople in this residence. Patriarch of Moscow and all Russia, Pimen. Patriarch Maxim of Bulgaria. Patriarch Theokstit of Romania. In a word, all delegations and all leaders of all these Orthodox churches were received in this residence.
Mr. Sergo, as it is known, due to the narrowness of the old residence, it was awkward even for the authorities of that time that the Patriarch was receiving foreign guests there. That is why His Holiness and Beatitude hosted the guest in the government summer residence located near the Tbilisi Sea. It should be noted that the friary named after Saint Ambrose the Confessor has been functioning in the building since 2002. A church is also being built.
Yes. The door was open to all in this old Patriarchate, including for us, young people. When we came here on the first floor, on the left side was the secretary of the Catholicos Patriarch, Grigory Mshvidobadze. Such a person worked there. He would register us and follow us to the second floor.
How did you meet the Patriarch? How do you remember the day when you first met and talked to the Patriarch?
I will begin with the fact that when His Holiness David V passed away, the day before his funeral, I saw the Metropolitan of Chkum, Abkhazia, for the first time. He was paying his last respects to the late Patriarch. It was a real discovery for me. The rest of the clerics were old, but he was young, with a distinctive appearance. He captured everyone's attention from the very beginning. The Patriarch had an amazing power of attraction from the very, very beginning. If you went to the church once and saw His Holiness, then you could not leave the church.
This is what happened during your meeting.
This is what happened when I first met His Holiness. Mr. Grigory Mshvidobadze took me up unto him. When I met His Holiness, I was so nervous that I was trembling. It was very difficult for a 23-year-old man to come to the Catholicos Patriarch. He calmed me down. We talked about my profession. He told me that the church needed young historians.
We would like to introduce you to some of the nuns and obedient who were next to Elias II during that period. Because of their lifestyle, they didn't want to appear in front of the camera. However, due to the great love for the Patriarch, they finally agreed. As it is known, His Holiness and Beatitude Elias II was a high priest of the Eparchy of Abkhazia before his inthronization from 1969 to 1977. Part of the nunnery followed the Patriarch from Sahumi to Tbilisi. They were 6. Among them were Mother Ketevan, currently in Skimnon Antonina, and obedient Evdokia, currently the nun Alexandra. Besides nuns and researcher of recent history of Georgian Church, Sergo Vardosanidze, we will introduce you Archpriest Reva Sikharulidze, one of the first acolytes of Patriarch, and Mary Sadradze, one of the first parishioners of Sioni Cathedral, after enthronement of His Holiness and Beatitude Elias II. Skimnon Antonina and Nun Alexandra are our respondents today. I'm from Abkhazia. When the Patriarch was enthroned and became Catholicos Patriarch Elias II, you followed him to Tbilisi, didn't you? And then started living in the old building where Patriarch lived too. Yes. What would you recall from that period? How difficult were those first years? It was a tight fit for all of us, but we lived with love. Patriarch enlightened people, returned trust to them. With the people of the Patriarch's prayer, many returned to the Christian faith.
Shemenon Antonina, Mandaria.
People didn't know even how to bless themselves. Whoever knew was doing it secretly, so that no one would notice. Lot of clergymen, lot of nuns say that the personality of patriarch made them to make decision to choose this path. Was it like this in your case too? It was like this. I was too confused and then I learned about this path. I chose to follow it. Nun Alexandra, Evdokia Isabish in her worldly life, also followed His Holiness Catholicos Patriarch Ilya II from Abkhazia to Tbilisi. She is Gaugus from Moldova. Patriarch David V passed away. Yes. Then His Holiness moved to Tbilisi. We were left in Sukhumi. Did you attend enthronement ceremony? No, we left for Moldova, and when His Holiness received consecration as Patriarch, he sent a telegram asking us to come.
Nun Alexandra, Yasibash.
But Mother Atanasi arrived, but I stayed there. Why? My mother did not let me. Did not let you? Generally, when you decided to join the church to choose this path, what did your parents, your loved ones say? As for my mother, she also go to church. She was a religious person too, but she didn't wanted me to become a nun. Didn't want it. She used to tell me to go wherever I wanted, to visit whichever monastery I wanted, but not to stay there. I told her I would visit His Holiness and come back home, but I arrived here and decided to stay. How old were you that time? I was 22. So young. As for the residence in Sukhumi, Ninashvili Street 13, did you have to live there? Yes, sure. When I remember it, I loved it. It was such a cozy house. The parishioners were very fond of His Holiness. Before we lost Abkhazia, did the Patriarch often visit Sukhumi? Yes, very often. As for the period when His Holiness Ilya II becomes a Patriarch, as we know, after enthronement, he starts living in that old residence. How would you remember that period? What were the first days like? As for first days, I remember that some people think we live in luxury. There was no luxury there. What was your duties during that period based on your obedience? That time we were sewing vestments for His Holiness. We were doing the laundry, knitting for tapestry. I cannot remember His Holiness being angry. He always treated us warmly. He treated everyone warmly. Have you ever noted that Patriarch was upset about something? Sometimes unpleasant things happen. Have he ever expressed it somehow? Maybe not with words, but have you ever noticed that he was very upset about something? Yes, but he does not say anything. He may talk about it very rarely. Young people from the capital, as well as from different parts of Georgia, gathered around the Patriarch to join the nuns. We will introduce the other nuns in our program and try to follow the main events chronologically. This is the refectory of His Holiness. The fresco painted by His Holiness. The fresco? Saint George, Lamb of God, Father Lord, and the Lamb is bringing the sealed book of life to Lord. Here His Holiness repasted. And after it, nuns ironed, embroidered, sewed on this table. There were no crosses here then. Then His Holiness would sit next to the nuns and teach them how to cut crosses. And imagine His Holiness repasted in this dining room. This place was also a workshop. Then the nuns cleared the table quickly because it was time for repast. His Holiness had to repast.
Nun Angelina, Khatiashvili.
They used to clear everything, then lay the table again. Guests would also come, maybe the corby shop. His Holiness never had dinner alone. He used to invite someone. Then we used to continue working. In a word, it was the Patriarch refectory. This small room was multifunctional. Yes, we have such good memories with it. As I know, a lot of guests come during that period. Yes, from the monastery, monks, desert fathers. Fathers used to come from the monastery of Bethania. They repasted here. His Holiness used to invite them sometimes and they repasted here. As for sleeping at night, they go to the chancellery room. Downstairs on the first floor. Yes, on the first floor. It was a chancellery during the day, and monks slept on the tables at night. After 6 a.m. they left the chancellery and we stayed here. The nuns stayed here. We received guests from Sukhumi too. Monks came from the Sukhumi desert almost every week. And you hosted everyone. What was your duties based on your obedience? I was helping in refectory. I remember the first words of His Holiness: treat the guests, leaving no one hungry. Formal receptions were held in the large room. Yes, formal receptions were held there, as well as business meetings. Yes, we held the receptions there. Please imagine His Holiness repasted here. That small room served as a bedroom. And here, in the opposite room, we received a lot of people from morning to evening. It is very hot here. Was there any possibility to cool their rooms down? There was no way for it. Once I remember we were waiting for a guest. I don't remember if he was a pope and patriarch of Alexandria. He often visited His Holiness during the period. It was very hot. His Holiness asked to us to fill the bowls with the cold water and to put them in the rooms. How modestly His Holiness lived. He had no adequate housing at all. He helped us to start our spiritual life with the very first steps. Before I came obediently, there was a sermon of Tuesdays. One Tuesday, during the ceremony, His Holiness came to the embo, told the parishioners, "My beloved Zioni parish, without your love, I could not bear to carry this cross." I remember everyone crying. It was still 1979 then. By the way, the Patriarch has said many times that without the love of the people, it would have been much harder for him to carry this cross. I learned about the Mary of Egypt from His Holiness. I remember how he was preparing us for the Great Fast, how His Holiness loved the prayer of Abram the Syrian, "O Lord and Master of my life," and I remember very well His Holiness empathizing the words at the crown of this prayer, "O Lord and King, grant me to see my own sins." What a feeling you had. His Holiness often mentioned these words in the Holy Trinity Church. This is a way to the heavenly kingdom. "O Lord and King, grant me to see my own sins." This is that historical room, that office where His Holiness was exactly this table. Yes, exactly this table, yes. This lion is still standing like that. This armchair where His Holiness used to sit. He used to work here all the time, and receipts were held here. Co-workers or guests used to come. Who came most often? Parish. Yes, parish. He often had meetings with the parishioners. Guests were also coming from abroad. The monks of Mount Athos used to come sometimes. Patriarch Nicholas also came often. It was also happening here in this room. This fresco was painted by Mr. Shura Banzeladze. When I came, this fresco was already here. We used to pray here in the evenings. Or when the weather was hot, on the balcony. When the nuns came from the desert, we would place them here. Chancellery, on the room where the entry staff of the Patriarchate was located at the time, was only 25 meters square. The staff was as follows: Secretary of the Catholicos Patriarch, his assistant, chronicler, 4 translators, 2 for English, 1 for German, and 1 for Greek. Manager of financial and economic activities, supplier, head of the construction department, typist. After they left, staff desks served as beds for monks. The next participant of our program is Mother Sophia, who has been with His Holiness and Beatitude Elias II for many years. She is of Greek origin. We know that the Patriarch loves plants very much. And gardening very much. Did he teach you gardening? I already knew how to take care of flowers. You know, when I took care of flowers, His Holiness liked it very much. He was a lecturer then. Yes, at the seminary. And there he said that one of the mothers, my name was Anastasia at that time, who plants backwards. And the plant will come out forwards. I noted that His Holiness loved me very much because I was doing his favorite job.
Skimnon Sofio, Popova.
Skimnon Sofio. Yes, his favorite job. What do you remember from those years? It was a difficult period. Everyone we recorded and interviewed mentioned that it was full of love. Mothers fondly recall those years. His Holiness showed such warmth that a lot of children came, sat in front of him when His Holiness was conducting a liturgy, when he was holding the church service. Besides, in the early days, His Holiness always walked in the courtyards and preached. He had a table there. Do you remember, Mother? He was sitting at the table and preaching. Just preaching. In the yard of Sioni Cathedral? In the yard of Sioni. Once we were already in the new Patriarchate, I was helping Mother Sophia in the garden. It was evening. His Holiness was in the yard and was coming from the backside. I was standing next to the Mother Sophia, and His Holiness said, "Mother Sophia, the flowers told me that they love me too much." I could not imagine if His Holiness lived in such a small house. He had nowhere to go. If we entered the yard, people would surround him. He used to come out in the yard of the Sioni Cathedral in the evening or later at night, when the cathedral was already closed. How could he come out? And at the time, the yard was always crowded. People would rush towards him. People loved His Holiness from the very beginning. I was still a member of the laity when I heard about him. People said, "We have an amazing patriarch and you have not seen him?" I came here in 1980, when the patriarch had been here for 3 years. He had an authority. The communists tried to undermine his authority, but he had a great authority among the people, among ordinary people and even among officials. Everybody liked him. They went to church secretly. I know officials who could not come during the day but came in the evening to talk to His Holiness. Everyone admired him because he spoke to ordinary people in simple language, and scientists in scientific language. The scientists themselves said this. The preaching was clear to scientists, and ordinary people understood it well too. Were you not surprised that the patriarch lived so modestly? This is a fairly modest building, modest, unrepaired. But then, with God's help, everything has been improved. But it was a difficult period, wasn't it? Very difficult. We also had a government that did not value religion very much. But when they met His Holiness surpassed them. He made them to follow him. He made young people to follow him. Yes. What position did you occupy? I was the head of supply and sales at the chocolate factory. Yes, at the chocolate factory. You were quite an influential and wealthy person. Yes. What did co-workers tell you at work? It was a Soviet period and the government of that time did not like people going to church. It was said at all the meetings that Buchuguri was attending the service. I said, "Yes, I go to church, and if you don't like it, I will take off these overalls and go. I will take off these overalls easily," I said. This meant that at heart you had already made that choice. Yes, I already knew. I saw so many things in His Holiness, so many faiths, so many struggles against everything. He always had to fight regarding to all issues. His Holiness had a hard time, very hard time, so much that you would feel pity for him. When I remember that period, when I started going to Sioni, and consequently in the Patriarchate, do you know what stage in my life it was? There are some key moments in life. When your worldview changes, your lifestyle changes, everything changes. A person may have such a turning point several times. It was exactly such time for me when I came to Sioni Cathedral. I was studying at the Faculty of Biology, you probably know. Yes, along with Mother Theodora and Mother Elizabeth. But there was another student, Tamar, who go to church before us. We knew nothing about the church. We did not even know where Sioni Cathedral was. We also did not know if there was a prayer or a liturgy the next day. Therefore, we were reading the Gospel. We were interested. We were talking about the Gospel. Tamar, meanwhile, was already attending prayers. She brought us to the church for the first time. Did you start reading the Gospel of your own free will? Yes, we were just curious and trying to understand. I cannot say that we understood everything, but obviously we felt something that Gospel is not a book. Yes, the Gospel is something that works directly.
Hegumen Mariam Mikaladze.
We were looking for, but didn't know exactly what we were looking for. But when she offered us, we happily went to pray. By the way, this prayer, I remember the prayer in the Sioni Cathedral. I remember the feeling then I came home, and that I didn't want to leave Sioni. Then we started going there on Wednesdays. Then the patriarch noticed that many young people had gathered. Did he give you some assessments during the day? Yes. As usual, he realized what to do with us, so to speak. He set for us one day in a week, Wednesday. So one day a week, we were in church and completely dedicated to God. Prayers, reading, and so on. Like the mothers live in the monastery. We thought it was really like this, but we didn't really know anything. Then I remember the relationship with His Holiness. He used to take us to Mertkopi Monastery. We worked there. He also worked with us. As for the Patriarchate, in particular, I remember the Patriarchate room where we used to go. Patriarch reception room? I remember refectory, yes. Sometimes he invited us to repast. I was so tensed that I could not eat. Everything was very tasty. The mothers hosted us, but were you nervous? Yes, I was nervous. I remember some things like photos. Yes, like shots. And everything was changing in me, in parallel after each meeting. I remember when I was in Sioni and I was worried about going to work. In the meantime, we graduated from university. I no longer wanted to be at work. I wanted every day to be Wednesday. So I quit my job. Then Mother Theodora also quit her job. And we started knitting tapestries. Stasha was teaching us. Mother Serapim was a postulant nun then. Yes, it was very interesting. His Holiness used to come there as well, sometimes. It was a great joy for us. The main thing for me was to be in church. If I was assigned to work as a cleaner, I would be satisfied with that too. I would do any job. But knitting was already interesting for me. His Holiness used to come. As soon as he saw what we were knitting, he would say, "This color is not good. Put it here. Do it like this here." I don't know how did he know all these things. It is the well-known fact that when you decided to connect life to church, also your friend, Mother Theodora, Mother Elizabeth, the students, this was followed by a great response and opposition from your families. What did the Patriarch tell you? What did he advise at the time? I don't remember if I told the memory of my father in that respect. Naturally, my poor parents were outraged because they had no idea what church was. I too grew up without knowing it. We didn't talk about God or the church in our family. However, these people lived very decently and honestly. Yes. But the knowledge of God was erased from their minds. Naturally, when they learned that their daughter had left her job and is going somewhere in the darkness, in trouble, and she is ready to work as a cleaner, I was terribly angry with my parents because they dared not to understand me, because they always understood me. They never forbade me anything. I only remembered the warmth and love from them, and suddenly I saw such a resistance to which I was not too accustomed. I suffered a lot. My mother was my best friend, and suddenly I lost her. I lost everybody, but everyone turned their backs, but I could not give up the church. There was so much happiness. The presence of the patriarch was an important factor, as a pillar that stands firm and you want to be close to it. I could not realize well all this, but it was attracting me. That is why I could not step back, and naturally the conflict was becoming deeper. Then, as it turned out, my father came to the patriarch. He was outraged. Therefore my father recalled this case like this. I went to the patriarch, sat in silence. I said everything. If our country loses a scientist like me and other young people, it would be a disaster. He was less nervous about reproduction. He presented his whole vision. The patriarch sat in silence. Then what could I do? When I said everything, I started telling the same thing a second time. My father said, then for the third time, for the fourth time, and when I said that 50th time, I felt all my stupidity. He said, no more aggression left, no more thought in my mind, and I sat completely empty and exhaled. The patriarch told me one sentence then. Yes, but did she choose this path herself? My father could not say anything and came back. He recalls this case himself like this now. In addition, he was jokingly telling us, if people ask why we went to the monastery, to answer that because of a broken heart. Patriarchate was like home to us. Old residence, small, very lonely. Everyone there knew each other. It was somehow a very warm place. I also remember when the new large building was handed over, how the patriarch was glad that there will be space for all of us there. We go and stay there. We were in some tower that time, and we often stayed at night on the floor, where there is a dining room. We even stole the chocolate that was in the cupboard. That was for mothers? Yes. We had the feeling that we were in a very big house, like we used to be in a small house, then moved into a big house. The little house near Sioni Cathedral was very warm. That was in 1989. I was not in the monastery yet, but I was going to Sioni. I worked in one of the labs. Once we had a French guest, I took them in Sioni Cathedral. I told them the history of the temple. They liked it very much. It so happened that he was coming down the stairs. Suddenly, these foreigners were frozen. I don't remember which acolytes followed His Holiness, but I asked if French guests could to approach the Patriarch.
Hegumen Elizabeth Zedgenidze.
I took the guest. They knelt before His Holiness and kissed his hand. His Holiness spoke with them. I was translating. What a happy is that country to have such a patriarch. French said excitedly and completely honestly. They talked about everything, including orthodoxy. Then one amazing incident happened. I have heard nothing about them. After a long time, I was already a nun. I visited a Terrason monastery in the south of France for a week. Suddenly, the same people came. I didn't recognize them, but they recognized me. It was a miracle. They baptized Orthodox. This is the Orthodox monastery of the Transfiguration in the southern France, where Father Elia and the archpriest, and they joined his parish. Just seeing the patriarch fascinated these people. Then they found an Orthodox priest, went to him to the south of France and were baptized. Probably they are still his parishioners. I have known His Holiness for many years and I don't remember him expressing some kind of dissatisfaction. He always thanking the Lord. He met the parishioners in one room. As you know, there was a period when all Georgians were converted. Pabudariani used to come to visit him. Also, young boys started coming to him. Among them were Zurab Javjavadze, Sosotsarateli, Temuratiani. They received spiritual nourishment from the Patriarch. What he had, he shared with everyone. You know about his mercy. Anyone brought anything to him, he was sharing it with everyone. We were young when suddenly decided to come to him as soon as we heard about his enthronement.
Nan Elene Napetvaridze.
It was as if we were expecting something new. It was something different from the environment we lived in, and the youth rushed towards the Temple of Sioni. It was so amazing. If you were on the square on Saturday evening or Sunday after the service, you would see youth flowing from Leseleze Street. And people said that prayer in Sioni was over, or the patriarch completed the service. It was the usual story. And was this because of personality of the patriarch? Of course it was like this. We were drawn there by the patriarch. It was interesting that we, the youth, we were of different generations, origins, interests, had to turn to a one united parish. How could this happen? His Holiness thought about it with this great love and was able to achieve it. It was interesting that His Holiness was teaching us everything. We knew nothing. We taught us to live a Christian life. Imagine that prayers were not even printed. Handwritten prayers were distributed. The ecclesiastical calendar was published, where psalms and prayers were printed in turns, but it was not available for everyone. Especially during the Great Lent, His Holiness used to order to print prayers on a typewriter and then distribute to the parish. This is how the prayer of Ephraim the Syrian and the prayer of the Archangel reached us. His Holiness taught us how to pray, when to pray, how to become a parish. The merits of His Holiness are invaluable, precisely in terms of creating a parish. Because going to church, lighting a candle and living does not mean church life yet. I remember how His Holiness instructed us to gather the parish once a week and spend that day ecclesiastical way. This day was Wednesday for us. We had a nickname, Wednesdays. It's so interesting because we met on Wednesdays. This kind of life was very interesting. This brought us so close that we, the old parishioners, still have such a relationship as if we are one family. When His Holiness saw that the parish was very united, he instructed Reverend Daniel, then Father David, to do something amazing. It was a way of Saint Nino. You know, we could not go to Foca then. The Javakheti was not easy to access for us. Georgians knew the region only through geography, by the geography of Georgia. Because if you were not from there, you could not get through. His Holiness traveled to Javakheti, registered as a local resident, and one day, after the service, he told us that he was in Javakheti. And it was a sore grief to him to see that nothing Georgian was left there. The ancient temples we built were neglected and abandoned. No Georgian chant, not even Georgian speech was heard. It is our duty to remember the merits of Saint Nino, to follow her footsteps, he said. This is how Saint Nino's path was created again. To tell you the truth, I was thinking how lovely is His Holiness when would this be done. I couldn't imagine it could happen so fast. It was probably in January and we celebrated May 31st already in Foca. It has been 31 years this way exists. Yes, the parish goes through this way every year. The first years were special, because we had no experience, neither the parish nor the priests. We really only relied on God. It was an unmarked path. Imagine that you have no cut, a path in a dense forest. We go like this without any experience, and every day turned to a miracle for us. I want to tell you that 3 years later, several high priests were added to our church. In what year did you decide to become a nun? I was already teaching at the university. It used to be like this. I followed my students from the first to the third year, and then I worked with them on diplomas and coursework. I could not leave them in the middle of the way. I have to go through this for 3 years. Yes, so I became obedient to Saint Nino. I walked on the path of Saint Nino for 3 years in a row, from 1989, including 1991. But I spent 3 days a week in a church. I used to go to the convent on Tuesdays evening to spend Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays there. I was coming from there for lectures on Monday. I spent 3 years like this. It is a big responsibility when you work with a group of students. Sure, you had to finish your job. I cannot be otherwise. From this third year, I could pass the group to another lecture so that I could go to the monastery. But in 1992, the famous events in Abkhazia began. Reverend Daniel was already a high priest, a bishop at the time. Along with other obedient, I followed him to Abkhazia. When I started going to the temple, I always was late. First I was doing domestic chores, then I was taking care of myself, then I was coming to the church. Sometimes in the middle of service, once His Holiness preached, "When you go to work, do you go on time? Alternatively, when you go to the theater or the cinema, do you go at the beginning? The church also has its time. The service starts at 9 a.m. and you should come at the time." Then he invented such a thing. He filled the basket with the communion bread, and in the morning, at the beginning of the service, he started handing out the communion bread. So we all tried to come earlier to get the communion bread from his hand. Everyone could buy it, but it was still different to take it out of his hand. So not at 9, but at 9:30 I was already in the temple to attend this process and take the communion bread from his hands. So no one was late for liturgy. There were so many people in the church, it was crowded. Then His Holiness instituted the Day of Blessing the Nation, then the Day of the Virgin, and so on. Yes, but the way it was a Children's Day on Mondays. One of those Mondays, I was presented a doll with her clothes on. Being a child, I loved this doll so much. With the blessing of the Patriarch, the toys were given to children. Mother Barbara, everyone who came to this building during the Patriarch's life here know that the mood, sand and mercy that were then felt is still preserved here. When the Patriarch moved from here, Salakaya was teaching a choir here in this place. When the Trinity Cathedral was built, a larger area was assigned for her there. Then Nadezhidze made repairs here. Banzelat's painting is still left. This table and purchase from the time of Kalistrata Tsindzadze. His Holiness has great respect for his heirloom. We wanted to change the floor. Yes, and he did not allow us. He said that 5 patriarchs walked on this floor. Everything is old here. All the times are from the time of His Holiness. Mother Barbara, what else did the patriarch instructed you? What did you do usually? It was 1987 or 88 when His Holiness called me and told that we could help large families, the needy and mothers whose child has died. Allocated a certain amount. We should provide not only financial but also spiritual help. In addition, in the 19th, on the first floor of a few residences, he opened a free dining hall for the needy. Their hosting was also instructed to me. Regardless of nationality, religion, everybody used this free dining hall. I was once instructed to bring food to the prisoners. When they learned that it was sent by His Holiness, they received it with such joy. They expressed so much love. Some prisoners dedicated poems. We have saved these poems. They said the Patriarch was the only consolation for them. Some even cried. Then we received a lot of letters. His Holiness replied with letters too. My son died in 1978. He was martyred. You understand well what a tragedy this is for Mother.
Mary Sadradze, one of the parishioners of Sioni Temple.
I'm a chemist. I was hesitating because after the atomic molecular doctrine, thinking about creating the perfect universe was a bit unimaginable for me. My close friend Tina Khalichava brought me to the temple. It was a great Tuesday. Everyone was holding a big candle, including me, and listening to the gospel. His Holiness was reading the gospel. Do you know what is most interesting? This side of my face where the Patriarch was standing became very hot. It did not even warm up, it was hot. I looked with surprised eyes. The Mother of God was directly in front of me. I looked at the Mother of God, holding a candle and thinking, Mother, Mother of God, it is true that the soul exists. How can the soul exist? In addition, I was in such doubts, you know? It was at this time that I felt the gaze of the Patriarch. I was ashamed. Do you know why? I thought he realized what I was thinking. I felt awkward. I blushed. The service was over and I was still doubting. When the prayer was over, Father Teso came to me and told me that His Holiness asked me to come to his residence. I was a little confused because my husband was a head of the Soviet financial police. This was happening at the time when it was forbidden to go to the temple to believe, to light a candle, and all this, in their view, God did not exist. My sister-in-law was with me because I felt bad and she followed me everywhere. She told me to go and we went upstairs. I was wearing black. When I entered, the Patriarch stood up and greeted me. He asked me why I was wearing black. I answered that my son passed away. He felt very sorry and invited me to sit. He asked me my name and surname and then answered all the questions I was asking the Virgin Mary. He replied that soul exists, that it has energy. He invited me the next day as well. I arrived the next day. The Patriarch was writing something. He told me to read it, make a copy of it, and then give it back to him. I copied the paper and returned it. It was written, Merciful Samaritan, Head Mary Saradze. So he assigned me as Merciful Samaritan. I could not understand what the Merciful Samaritan meant. It was written there helping the needy, students, the disabled, all kinds of charity work, finding the sick in hospitals and burying the homeless deceased. All this was so foreign to me. Imagine burying the homeless deceased. You have to find first, then perform a lot of rituals. And I did it. I did everything. Do you know what was the most interesting? When I returned that list, it had an aluminium bowl. So he put it on it and burned it. And he said to me, "This is our secret, no one should know." Mary Sadradze continues her charitable activities even today. She is one of the leaders of the Psalms group. Through his efforts, a temple was built in Achara, and many icons were written.
His Holiness used to call us in the evenings, in the old Patriarchate. We used to gather on a small balcony. He taught us that we should all have our own Lazarus. Whoever you bring medicine or clothes every day,
Whoever you help.
and made all of us to have such Lazarus. Archpriest Sikharulidze, one of the first acolytes of Patriarch.
You probably associate many memories with the old building of the Patriarchate.
I remember many things, yes, with old buildings.
Who was gathering? Who was coming? What do you remember about the Patriarch?
The Patriarch was a remarkably warm person. When he looked at a person, if he had some trouble, he would talk about that trouble to him. He would break his barrier so easily. He was so direct. He would destroy the wall between them. People then started having a relationship with Patriarch in such a way that everyone emphasized his personality, that he expressed an amazing love and warmth towards people, especially in relation to the youth, to the intellectuals.
Yes.
He was amazing. Monday was
For children.
a day of blessing for children.
Yes.
At 7, Tuesday was a day of prayer and preaching. We attended everything. We were in Sioni every day.
Did the famous Tuesdays when the Patriarch met with the intellectuals start in the old building?
Yes, it started in the old building. A lot of people were coming. Some were party workers. Some were representatives of nomenclature.
Some were representatives of the arts.
Some were representatives of the arts. But everybody became different with the Patriarch. All became trustful lambs with the Patriarch. Amazing spiritual fullness prevailed. I was a child then, but from this perspective, great things were happening. The nation was turning to the Lord.
I wanted to ask you to remember the period when you become acolyte of Patriarch. It is known that he did not have any Georgian acolytes.
Yes.
There was no one to help with attire. How did you get together and who else were the first acolytes?
I used to go to Sioni Cathedral, and once, after the enthronement, the Patriarch was attired by the Russians. Acolytes were coming from Alexander Nevsky Cathedral, and there was Mr. Victor, the Patriarch's brother.
Yes, his brother.
God bless him. He once told me that the Patriarch was calling me. I felt a bit shocked and entered. The Patriarch led me to this altar. I bowed. He blessed me and told me to come in the evening. He told others along with me too. Then His Holiness locked the door of Sioni and taught us himself how to attire, how to hand the scepter, how to kiss his hand. We had to do all this synchronously. He saw everything, observed everything. He gave us remarks and we accepted it. For example, while pulling over a mantle,
Yes.
you should not touch his head. That's how he taught us everything himself. Reverend Dimitri was with me, and he was called Chabuka in that time.
Nephew of the Patriarch.
Nephew, Gogishiolashvili, deceased, God bless him.
Although a nephew.
George Centuria, God bless him too.
Zurab Chavchavadze.
Zurab Chavchavadze. Temur Chikhladze. Afterwards, Father Theodore, Sosazereteli, Mamuga Georgadze. Amazing person. The first acolytes were very distinguished.
Soso Tsarateli was one of the guys from the plane.
He also used to wear supplies, yes. Amazing warmth and love reigned during that period, when we were about 20 acolytes. We loved each other so much. We loved our work so much. The Patriarch entrusted us, for example, to read Psalms. How did reading of the Psalms begin? With the fact that they could not stop at the altar. They were talking. And then...
Acolytes.
Acolytes, yes. Reverend Ioane, we called him Guram.
Father George. Reverend Ioane, yes.
Reverend Ioane Gamrekali, yes. His Holiness instructed him to bring the Psalms, then handed them to us and told us to read it so that we could be silent. When something needed to be done, I was instructed to tell them that. For example, it was a time of hand washing. The Patriarch observed everything very carefully. His eyes gave their marks to us. When he just looked at us, we immediately realized what we had to do. For example, if the candle had to be fixed, we would go and fix it. Just without words.
With eyes.
That is, he was telling us everything without words, with fatherly warmth and love. Once it happened that, in the old days, it was such charcoal. We used to foment it by hand, and we forgot to foment. The Patriarch should have already entered. I should have held the incensory in my hand. Altar boys were spinning the incensory to make air being supplied, soon to coil, to be fermented soon. Suddenly, the incensory hit the chair, and the incensory stopped, but the coil flew over, and it flew over the iconostasis and fell forward. It looked like as if it had exploded. People screamed. Of course, I went out. I felt very awkward.
What did the Patriarch say?
Nothing, neither reprimand. Once, Reverend Dmitri Jabuka and I went out for hand washing. Georgi Chanturia was in the middle. We had to wash hands to the Patriarch. I passed from the left, Jabuka from the right. All three of us approached him. Then the Patriarch extended his hand to us and...
There was no jug.
There was no jug. We looked at each other. Then Jabuka ran away. He had to take out the jug from the right side. I was standing there and I stayed with the Patriarch. And deceased Gia Chanturia was with us too. 1 second was equal to 1 hour for us, but...
Probably the Patriarch understood everything, right?
He encouraged us with a smile.
A verbal remark would be very serious, right?
That would have been a bad thing.
Have you had such a case?
Yes, I had.
Mr. Sergo, I would also like to ask you about one event. This is a tragedy of 1983. Airfloat Flight 6833. We are interested in your opinion. What information do you have? What happened? What was the position of the Patriarch regarding this event?
I knew Father Theodore Chekladze from so-called the boys of the plane. He was first obedient, then became a priest. He befriended.
Did he serve in Sioni Temple?
Yes, yes.
He was obedient in Sioni.
He was friend of Gogi Shiolashvili.
Nephew of the Patriarch.
Gogi introduced me to Father Theodore. He told him that I was our kind of guy. That meant that I was not dangerous man.
Yes.
And we talked about a lot of things. Father Theodore was standing there. When we entered Sioni Temple, he was always standing on the left side, with head hanging low. He was also an acolyte.
Yes.
The photos are preserved, and it was taken with the Patriarch during concentration of water. The fact that later Father Theodore found himself in the dock was intentionally done by the authorities, because he was not with the plain boys. He was only friend for them. Authorities argue that the accused might have confessed to Father Theodore, who should have been notified to law enforcement, and, in a word, he found himself in the dock. What should the Patriarch have done at such time? He was asked for an explanation regarding the clergyman. Today some argue that the Patriarch claimed that Father Theodore was not a clergyman. It did not happen, and they cannot prove it with any argument. I know it.
This is a lie.
Of course. One thing I know for sure. The Catholic Patriarch appealed to the authorities and asked them not to shoot the accused. A similar appeal was prepared by the other part of the society, scientists,
Yes.
cultural figures. But many of them, under pressure from the authorities, withdrew the petition. The current Patriarch and the situation then are not the same. When people cannot distinguish epochs from each other, it's very difficult.
Yes.
It's very difficult.
Today it's easy to talk about everything, including the lies.
Yes, it is. His Holiness and Beatitude has always been by the side of the youth. The strength of our Church was, of course, determined by God's protection and youth. The Patriarch has always been supported by the youth. The Patriarch was always open with the youth. Only one meeting with His Holiness was bringing them back to the Church. The wall of artificial alienation that the atheist government built in 1921 between Church and people has been shattered. By this consistent, patient, and peaceful policy pursued by His holiness and beatitude.
Yes, and Mr. Sergo, right here in the yard of Sioni Temple, members of the national movement, dissidents were gathering. It can be said that here in this yard, the national movement was born. These people gathered around the Patriarch. Therefore, I would like to ask you about the April 9th.
Let's start by saying that yes,
It was a tragic event in our history.
I agree that people gathered right there. Zviedgamsachurdia, Merabkostava, Iajantoria, Irakli,
Tsereteli.
Kadagishvili, Irakli Tsereteli, Irakli Batiashvili, and so on. They were here. They were discussing here. First they attended the service. Then they came out. The only support for these young people was here. If the Patriarch did not sympathize with the national movement, naturally, they could not gather here. As for the April 9th, I have been informed that the danger is real. Maybe there are only a few minutes left before this danger. Therefore, my spiritual children, you are blessed to come, to go together to St. George Kashueti Church, and to thank the Lord.
What made me decide to become a nun? I could not decide.
Nan Anna Ziglauri.
It was 19th at the time, and it was a terrible situation, and it was very necessary for His Holiness to be there. The situation was very tense. You are recalling April 9, 1989, right? Yes, I'm recalling that day, yes. At the time the riot started, the mothers ran away. What could I do? I went to His Holiness' office. There is an icon of Savior. I could not read the prayer at the time and prayed with my own words. May there be peace, may the homeland be saved, and may His Holiness return in peace. If this happens, I will take Monasinkos, I promised. I swore before the Savior. When His Holiness left, Mother Theodora began to cry. I got angry to her, said that did not wanted to see her crying. I spoke so loudly, then we opened the door of Sioni Temple and we prayed all night there. Then His Holiness returned. It was morning. Who could sleep? You knew about the victims. Early in the morning, people began to gather in the temple courtyard. Sunday dawned. His Holiness had to come to the service. I remember I came down and approached to the Crander's table, and Father Gabriel was bustling there. Urgebadze, Father Gabriel. Father Gabriel greeted me, and the first thing he said to me was, I share your grief, the grief of His Holiness and your grief. Those were Father Gabriel's words. I remember when His Holiness entered Sioni. There were a lot of people. His Holiness was crying so much, he was holding the cross in his hand and weeping loudly. He's weeping, a temple full of people. Then you probably know the pictures were exhibited for the whole 40 days. Yes, a funeral was held here. Yes, I will never forget His Holiness weeping. As a result of the great and many years of efforts of His Holiness and Beatitude Elias II, in 1990, the Patriarchate of Constantinople recognized and acknowledged the historical autocephaly of Georgian Apostolic Orthodox Church. I empathize historical autocephaly and not recognized in 1917. It's known that it was in this building, at the historic table, that negotiations were held regarding recognition of historical autocephaly of Georgian Church. What would you recall?
If His Holiness and Beatitude Elias II had done nothing else in his life, he would have just gone down in history of Georgian Church only because of the merits. He contributed for recognition of the historical autocephaly of Georgian Church.
Yes.
Patriarchate of Constantinople was ready to acknowledge autocephaly of our church from 1917.
When it was restored.
When it was restored, yes. It was a major difference of opinions, and our church and His Holiness disagreed with. As early as 1917, when the autocephaly of our church was restored, it was not recognized by the churches of any Orthodox country. In 1943, when Russia recognized the autocephaly of our church, this was a very important event, as other churches restrained themselves for fear of Russia. So this way was open for them. When His Holiness was a bishop in 1963 and was attending an Orthodox forum in Rhodes, the Georgian Church was represented as an autonomous church by its hosts, which was followed by a very serious protest by the young high priest. When His Holiness returned to homeland, he reported to Catholicos Patriarch Ephraim that our church was not recognized and asked how they should act. His Holiness Ephraim instructed him to work on this issue, and Bishop Ilya then began consultations with Georgian scholars. Among them were academician Elena Metreveli, Nodar Lomauri, Mariam Lord-Kipanidze, Zaza Alexidze, Babilina Lominadze. They were the people with whom His Holiness worked intensively on the issues of autocephaly of the Georgian Church. They had to collect the documents. Later, when His Holiness became Patriarch on December 25, 1977, he immediately began to fight for the cause. The struggle literally lasted until 1990. By the way, in 1979, when His Holiness arrived to Constantinople, it was his first visit as Catholicos Patriarch. He told the World Patriarch of Constantinople, His Holiness Demetrius, directly during the greeting, that they refer to Georgian Church as the Catholicos and not as the Patriarchate, as it was pointed out that their official letters and that issue should be rectified immediately. If they do not think seriously to fix this mistake, Georgian Church would have nothing to speak about it with them.
What was the position of Constantinople?
The position of Constantinople was as follows. We consider everything, we will definitely create a commission, we'll discuss in details and make the desired decision from you. But the situation lasted a long time. Delegations from Constantinople have repeatedly arrived for negotiations. Last was Metropolitan Bartholomew of Philadelphia. The current Patriarch then, Metropolitan Militon of Chalcedon and others. Negotiations were held with this priest, and our scholars were involved too. And during these tense negotiations, the Patriarch was very strict.
Principled.
For instance, the delegation of the Patriarchate of Constantinople agreed with everything. They only offered to take chrism from them. All Orthodox churches, which are Greek language, take chrism from Constantinople.
Historically in Skheta.
Patriarch refused. Historically, chrism has been made in our country. George Metzule's Life of Grigol Khansteli and other documents confirm this. Besides, in 1918, when autocephaly was restored, the first thing Kyrion did was to prepare chrism in Georgian Church at Ista. We would not give up on that. Finally, during the negotiations, at one point, His Holiness got up and walked out of the office. Our scholars and high priests remained in the room. They guessed that Patriarch would not step back. Finally, when the delegation was leaving, they called from the airport of Constantinople and decided that the matter should be resolved as it was historically. Historically meant that chrism was made in our church. On March 4th, 1990, the World Patriarchate of Constantinople recognized our historical autocephaly. This is very important. It is the result of efforts of His Holiness, his dedication and adherence to principles.
You took part in an event of historical significance. This is building of holy chrism. Yes, I took part, but this happened after the recognition of autocephaly when chrism was built for the first time. How did this happen, Mother? His Holiness was very upset and asked me to get olive oil somewhere. We wrote to Finland, to Greece. We could not get it. We needed 2.5 tons of olive oil. It was a large amount and not 1 or 2 liters. Yes, we needed large amount. I started walking. I went to every single shop. I knew the shops. I was dealing with the stores every day. I wanted with all my heart to fulfill the task because His Holiness wanted it so much and such a miracle happened. Yes, it is winter. And I see King Tamar in a dream. As if she was knocking on my window, I jumped up quickly and in a dream. Yes, Tamar, get up. The carriage has arrived, she tells me. What are you standing on, King? I ask. There was nothing to support. Yes, and she was knocking on the window. Yes, in your dream. She answered nothing. I woke up and thought that such a dream had to mean something. I told my sister Mariam. It was 5:45 already. It was winter. I was afraid to go out and asked my sister to follow me. I told her something was going on. We went and met the man who was registering the wagons. I asked what was in these wagons. He told to learn now. He went and came and told me that there was olive oil in one of the carriages. What are you saying? I said, Vana, remove it and send it directly to the patriarchate. There were also workers. Did you buy immediately? Of course, it is not worth talking about. When I brought it, the workers helped me. Who else would take it? The workers were necessary. They were so happy to receive a blessing from the patriarch. However, when the saint saw this oil, he embraced everyone as if we were no longer there. He did not even look at us anymore. Mother Elena, I would like to ask you about the period when you had to be in Abkhazia. During a very difficult time during the war in Abkhazia. We know that Reverend Daniel was the high priest of the Diocese of Abkhazia then. Yes. We know also that when our patriarch was a metropolitan, he had to serve in Abkhazia for some years. Regarding those difficult times, do you remember some episodes when people remembered the patriarch, his service, there or Reverend Ilya? Of course. Yes. Even though so many years have passed, they still remember our patriarch with great affection. It was something, an incredible joy for them. I will tell you more. When we arrived, only the authority of the patriarch protected us. We were newcomers. We had done nothing yet. We were waiting when His Holiness would call us. When He called us, the day was the happiest and brightest for us, because with His usual featherly warm voice, He was asking us what we needed, how we were. Are you afraid? He used to tell us sometimes, if you are afraid, come back. This great happiness helped us to endure everything. He helped us with the warmth He showed towards us, and we felt there as a result of great merit and work. The whole parish remembered him with special love and affection. Our Father, they say like this, our Father. We met his choristers there who chants during liturgy. His candle makers remembered him with great love. The local nuns. It was something like a continuous connection between here and there. As we know, our patriarch, as soon as he was enthroned, began to take care of the Georgians of Hereti and in general of the Georgians of our lost territories, of the Georgians living in Feridun or abroad. I would like to ask you about Hereti. How the patriarch started relations with the Georgians of Hereti. You were from Hereti. The enthronement of His Holiness was a great transfiguration and a great change for the whole of Georgia. The intellectuals, the society of Tbilisi and people in whole Georgia soon felt that the country acquired a great caregiver. We went to listen to the preaching. Soon I had to work at the Patriarchate. I became an employee of the Patriarchate in the old residence, in the building which is in the courtyard of Sioni Temple. Yes, I remember meeting His Holiness. The Patriarch instructed you relations with Georgian of Hereti, right? Yes, I already had relations with Georgians of Hereti. But this relationship had to be activated from an ecclesiastical point of view.
Obedient Marta Tartarashvili.
I was instructed to write a topic about Hereti, the same Saingilo. From the day of his enthronement, His Holiness began to think and care about Hereti. He instructed me to print articles. In parallel, I bought epistles to Hereti Georgians, Christmas, New Year epistles. I was distributing them among the people who would not divulge. It was a dangerous thing to do. What was the reaction of Georgians of Hereti? They were very happy and liked it. They asked about the Patriarch. Of course, whatever feeling I had, I shared with them, with everybody. Then the questions arose. Why didn't His Holiness open the church for them as if it were easy? It would be very difficult. Then slowly the care of His Holiness paid off, and in 1988 the church opened. St. George Church in Kachi, on the territory of Kachi. It was a great consolation. Sure, Georgians of that place. When I first arrived and the first Easter service was held at Kachi Church, people came from all over the villages. The whole yard was filled. This liturgy was amazing. It was a very special day. First, ecclesiastical day. The next day, the baptism took place. Since then, the liturgy has been held regularly. Then His Holiness tried to establish dioceses of Hornabuji and Kurumuchi. Baku has been reluctant to accept these proposals. Their officials didn't like these names. Then we offered the Dopleskara and Hereti dioceses. The Dopleskara and Hereti dioceses, yes, we liked it more. You know what I want to ask you? Yes. Please recall the day when you took some people, Georgians of Hereti, to the old residence in the yard of Sioni Temple. It was in 1987. How was that meeting? His Holiness met us with such joy. He received them, and I still remember his words. You should have come earlier. This is your house too. As if he rebuked and cursed them at the same time. The students were amazingly happy. His Holiness gave church calendars and the monastery gifts them too. The children were hugging with the calendars. When we came out, they told me that they would buy the Bible with that money. My friends and I met His Holiness when we were students. We learned that the new edition of the Bible was about to issue. We came to the Patriarchate. New opportunities for relations with His Holiness appeared.
Huguemin Mariam Japaridze.
Patriarchy was like home to me. I didn't mention the monastery yet where I went after. The Patriarchate was a great opportunity for me to see what living Christianity is. I, who had a special need, along with my money, of my friends, people of my generation, found the way to freedom in this dictatorial and highly ideological state. I was given a chance to see where this path is and what it is like. Then there was a war in Samachablo in 2008. Clearly, it was difficult for everyone. When the Russian army was deployed, I had to go to Samachablo in that period. I even found myself in Nicosia. I took monastic vows in Akhlagori. I found myself directly to the environment which was a battlefield in the past. We lost this place. For several years I could not and did not want to see His Holiness. I avoided seeing him because in His Holiness, the pain of losing all this was so strong, so intense, that it was difficult for me to touch his pain, to face up his feelings. I understood what the past called the path of crucifixion means. His Holiness carried a different sense of love for the homeland. I want to empathize the Caucasus factor too. He seems to carry the Caucasus within himself. What can I wish to our patriarch? Everything good and precious that exists in this world. His life is very precious to us, really very precious. I don't know how to express it in words. We have exhausted our patriarch. If I could, I would take out of my soul and my health, I would give everything to him. What is happening lately? I don't know. I received nothing more than kindness from the patriarch. I'm surprised. How dare they say that? I don't know. I cannot say. I wish His Holiness a long life, health, because Georgia needs him very much. Not just us, everyone needs him. I always pray before repassing for the patriarch to be healthy. First of all, I wonder how His Holiness can endure so much slander. It is so painful for us. It would be much more painful for him. I wonder how they manage to invent these gossips. We live with him, right? Better than us to know how His Holiness lives. It is a wonder how people invent such lies and how His Holiness can endure everything. First, His Holiness taught us love, patience, and repentance. I don't know how much we manage to live like this, but His Holiness is an example for us and very try to be patient when we are insulted. I wish His Holiness a long, healthy life and to see a united, glorious Georgia. After all, this is his dream. May God fulfill it. Congratulations to our Patriarch for the Guardian Angel Day.
Nan Mariam Anua.
May God give to His Holiness courage, health, longevity. May His Patriarchy continue for many years in Georgia. As long as we have our Patriarch, we are all fine. First of all, I wish him health. I ask God very much. I love His Holiness more than my family members. He is very precious. Your Holiness, we really need you. Whole world needs you, not only we. Your existence is a great hope for us. May the Lord protect you for many years, Your Holiness. Amen. Maybe we should give him more love. We can't pay for his merits if we have 100 lives. It will be not enough for that. This person has created the epoch, restored the Georgian church from ashes, and continues to revive it. Whoever fulfills his blessing is happy.
Nan Paraskeva. Kotsiridze.
Joy comes for him. This is not a simple matter. We ask the prophet Ilya, Saint Ilya Chavchavadze, that with their help, His Holiness to stay by our side for a long time, to become stronger, even more stronger. We hope that every second, every day of His Holiness is an immense experience. With each passing day, he gets closer to the Lord, and he shares this experience with everyone. We are very happy people because we grew up under the wings of His Holiness. His Holiness created us. He formed as a parish and as Christians. It is a great happiness to be contemporary of Him, to live in period when He lives. Exactly. Congratulations to our Patriarch, the Lord has given him everything. The only thing he probably wants is for us to listen and be able to live by his words, to follow him. We have a very easy task, Many do not have such an easy task. I think in the world, Georgians have the easiest task to just listen to Patriarch and follow him. May God enable us to do this, because if we fail, we will be responsible. I hope that we can.
Author and presenter, Elizabeth Abuladze. Chief producer, Ia Bedoidze. Producer, Ketevan Mashakidze. Cameraman, Georgi Nozadze, Georgi Davitashvili, David Alaverdashvili, Leiza Kaidze, Zurab Gelashvili. Editing director, Teona Butsrikidze. Makeup designer, Nana Natslishvili. Technical producer, Zurab Jahua. Drivers, David Ghanchaveli, Guillaume Jedlishvili, David Mebuga, Tamas Matitashvili. The program is prepared with the blessing of Archpriest Mikhail Popkhadze. Patriarchate Television, Ertsuloneba, 2020.